Today we're going to change spark plugs on an M62 motor. These are found on 740 ILs, 540s. There's also an M62 TU, which means technical upgrade, but this is just a regular one. And spark plugs don't matter too much as far as the procedure for changing them between the M62 and upgraded ones. Remove the bolts that hold the cover on. You should get a small screwdriver with a small flat blade. You stick it, there's a little slot right here, you stick it in and it pops right out. I know my hand covered it up, but see how tight this area was back here? You really want to use one of these little guys. And believe me, that works the best. Don't use a pick or anything else. Little small screwdriver. Next, you remove the screws that hold the cover on. As you can see, it should be finger tight. You don't want to tighten these things down too much. And then sometimes it's difficult to tell when they're loose. As you can see, it's pretty tight in here. I can use a smaller extension. It's probably my best bet here, but or just a deep well socket. But you can figure that stuff out as you go along. Alright, I forgot to say remove the top cover. That's going to have to come off. You can take your bolts out, you can leave them in, and this pops right off. There's a connector to the junction box to each coil, and each coil sits over the spark plugs. Connect the electrical connection. You push the lockdown tab forward, and then you lift up the connection so that it's free. This stays attached to the coil. Next, you can remove the two nuts that hold the coil pack on above each spark plug. Again, you may need a variety of extensions, but it's 10mm socket. And then of course you want to be careful not to drop these guys in here. Hopefully if you do drop them, they go inside of here and you can retrieve them with a magnet. Just be careful, take your time, and this just comes right out. Next, I have two spark plug sockets. One lets the spark plug go in and out freely. I use that to install. One grips it. I use that to remove it. And sometimes I'll just unscrew them and then pull them out with a magnet. So depending on which spark plug it is, I like to really stand back and reach in as opposed to getting right down on top of it. There is clearance there, but I like to really reach in there if I can. I think really there's only two problem children. It's like number 2 over there, believe it or not, and number 8 over here. Oh, and by the way, for an M62 engine, the cylinders are 1, 2, 3, 4 over here. And on the driver's side, 5, 6, 7, 8. Alright, out it comes. Now this one's pretty fouled up because it was an oil problem. The intake manifold back cover was leaking, and so I knew there was a problem. So here's a little trick that I use. I use a 1/4 inch drive and a 10mm, and I use that to break these loose, and I unscrew them, and I use the socket. I keep pressure on the socket to keep the nut from flying off or dropping, and then I capture it with my finger, and that usually prevents it from falling. And that's a little trick I use. Alright, you probably won't see any wear on these extenders. This is just a spring in here between the coil and the spark plug, but you do want to look for oil. If there's oil on here, then your cam cover gaskets are leaking, and that's pretty common on this engine. One thing about torquing these down is you keep tightening and tightening and tightening, and then the wrench stops moving and you're waiting for it to click. You're going, oh my gosh, I'm gonna break it. But it'll click eventually. There's not much you can do to these engines, so if you have a rough idle or it's lost power, especially if you change the intake manifold cover back here recently because it was burning oil, white smoke was coming out your exhaust pipe, which is what this job is. Do the obvious things. Change the spark plug. That's about all you can do, and you'll be surprised how much performance you'll get out of it. Alright, to put these back on, you bring the tab out, little lockdown bar, connect the junction box to the coil, push it in till you hear it click. And on one location on both sides there's a grounding strap. Make sure that's on one of the studs. It can be on any of them. Then you want to put your nuts back on. Make sure you don't drop them anywhere. And then we'll put the cover back on and go to the other side. So that's spark plugs. There's one other detail you should know about if you're struggling to get the cover back on, is these boots are designed to fit into this, over top of this gasket right here in a very specific place. If this gasket has come off, it's just pressed on to seal the cover on. If everything's not lined up correctly, you'll have trouble putting this on. Also, there are little indents here for this to line up on. Oops. And only finger tight on these hold down bolts. Finger tight only. And the final touch. All done.